Imagine a city surrounded. Imagine an empire so vast, so powerful, that its very name struck fear into the hearts of nations. This was Jerusalem in 71 BC, encircled by the mighty Assyrian army, a force of 185,000 soldiers led by the ruthless king Sennacherib. The odds were insurmountable, the situation hopeless. Or was it? History is filled with moments that defy explanation, where the impossible becomes reality. What happened next in Jerusalem would become one of those moments, a story of faith, courage, and divine intervention that has echoed through millennia. How did a small, seemingly defenseless city stand against one of the greatest military powers the world had ever known? Was it strategy, luck, or something far greater? This isn't just a tale of ancient warfare. It's a story about human resilience and the power of belief when all seems lost. It's about a king who refused to surrender, a people who dared to hope, and a God who answered in ways no one could have predicted. If you've ever wondered what it takes to face overwhelming odds and emerge victorious, this is a story you need to hear. Stay with me as we uncover the dramatic events that changed the course of history, and perhaps the way you see the world today. Imagine a time when the world was ruled by empires so vast, their names alone could send shivers down the spines of kings and commoners alike. Among these, one empire stood out, not just for its size or military might, but for the sheer terror it inspired. This was the Assyrian Empire, a juggernaut of ancient history, known for its relentless expansion, brutal tactics, and an unyielding thirst for dominance. By 71 BC, this empire had already carved its name into the annals of history through conquest after conquest, leaving behind a trail of subjugated nations and razed cities. Its leader, King Sennacherib, was a man whose reputation preceded him, a ruthless strategist, a master of psychological warfare, and a ruler who demanded absolute submission from those he sought to conquer. Now, picture Jerusalem, a city perched on a hill, surrounded by rugged terrain and fortified walls. It was not the largest city, nor the most powerful, but it held something far greater than material wealth. It was the heart of a people bound together by faith, tradition, and an unshakable belief in their God. Yet, as the sun rose over the horizon one fateful morning, the people of Jerusalem woke to a sight that would have frozen the blood of even the bravest warrior. Stretching as far as the eye could see was the Assyrian army, a sea of soldiers, weapons glinting in the sunlight, tents sprawling across the landscape like a monstrous beast ready to devour its prey. Estimates placed their numbers at 185,000 strong, a force so overwhelming that resistance seemed futile. For weeks, the Assyrians tightened their grip around Jerusalem, cutting off supply lines and isolating the city from the outside world. The psychological toll was immense. Every day, the people within the walls could hear the distant rumble of marching feet, the clanging of armor, and the occasional taunts carried by the wind. They knew what awaited them if the walls were breached. The Assyrians were infamous for their cruelty. Cities that resisted were annihilated, their populations either slaughtered or taken into captivity. Tales of their atrocities spread like wildfire, striking fear into the hearts of anyone who dared oppose them. But there was more to this siege than brute force. The Assyrians were masters of breaking spirits before they broke bodies. Their strategy was calculated, methodical, and devastatingly effective. They didn't just attack with swords and spears. They attacked with words, sowing seeds of doubt and despair among their enemies. In this case, They targeted the very foundation of Jerusalem's strength, the faith of its people. Through carefully crafted speeches delivered in Hebrew, the language of the Jews, they mocked King Hezekiah, ridiculed the idea of trusting in God, and boasted of their own invincibility. "Has any God ever been able to save their people from us?" they sneered. It was a question designed to shake the resolve of even the most devout believer. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure mounted. Hunger gnawed at the stomachs of the besieged. Fear whispered in their ears, urging them to surrender. From the outside, it seemed inevitable. The fall of Jerusalem was only a matter of time. But beneath the surface, something remarkable was stirring. A king was praying, a prophet was speaking, and a people, though battered and weary, were clinging to hope. Little did the Assyrians know, they were about to face an adversary, unlike any they had encountered before, an adversary who would not be defeated by human hands. In the face of overwhelming odds, where fear could have paralyzed any leader, King Hezekiah of Judah chose a different path, one rooted in faith, resilience, and unwavering determination. Imagine standing on the walls of Jerusalem, looking out at the vast Assyrian army that stretched beyond the horizon. The weight of leadership must have been crushing. Yet, instead of succumbing to despair or surrendering to the inevitable, Hezekiah took decisive action. His response was not just about preparing for war. It was about preparing his people, body, mind, and soul, for what lay ahead. Hezekiah's first step was practical, fortifying the city's defenses. He knew that survival depended on making Jerusalem as impenetrable as possible. Under his direction, workers labored tirelessly to strengthen the city walls, repair breaches, and construct additional barriers where needed. Every stone laid was a testament to human ingenuity and resolve. But Hezekiah didn't stop there. Recognizing the importance of resources during a prolonged siege, he ensured that water supplies were secured. One of his most remarkable achievements was the construction of an underground tunnel, a marvel of ancient engineering that diverted water from the Gihon Spring into the city. This ingenious solution guaranteed that Jerusalem would have access to fresh water, even if the siege dragged on for months. It wasn't just infrastructure, it was a lifeline, both literal and symbolic, sustaining the body and bolstering the spirit. But Hezekiah understood something far deeper than military strategy. True strength comes from within. Physical preparations alone would not be enough to withstand the psychological onslaught of the Assyrians. To face such a formidable enemy required more than weapons. It demanded unity, courage, and an unshakable belief in something greater than oneself. And so, Hezekiah turned his attention to the spiritual renewal of his people. At the heart of Jerusalem stood the temple, the sacred dwelling place of God, which had fallen into disrepair over the years. Hezekiah saw this neglect as a reflection of the spiritual apathy that had crept into the nation. Determined to restore not only the building, but also the faith of his people, he ordered the purification and rededication of the temple. The restoration of the temple became a turning point for Jerusalem. Priests and Levites worked day and night to cleanse the holy space, removing idols and restoring the altars. Sacrifices were offered once again, prayers rose like incense, and the sound of worship filled the air. For the first time in years, the people gathered together, not out of obligation, but out of genuine repentance and renewed devotion. Hezekiah called upon them to return to their covenant with God, reminding them that their hope did not rest in the strength of their armies or the height of their walls, but in the power of the Almighty who had delivered their ancestors from slavery in Egypt and guided them through the wilderness. Hezekiah's leadership extended beyond logistics and rituals. He inspired his people to trust in God despite the circumstances. In public addresses, he reassured them that while the Assyrians might boast of their conquests, they were merely men, finite, flawed, and ultimately powerless against the Creator of the universe. "Do not be afraid," he urged, "for there is a God in heaven who reigns supreme." These words resonated deeply with the people, igniting a spark of hope in their hearts. They began to see themselves not as victims of Assyria's might, but as instruments of divine purpose. What makes Hezekiah's approach so compelling is its balance between practicality and spirituality. He recognized that preparation without faith leads to arrogance, while faith without preparation can lead to complacency. By addressing both the physical and spiritual needs of his people, he created a foundation strong enough to weather the storm. The result was nothing short of extraordinary: a united city, fortified in every sense of the word, ready to face whatever came next. As we reflect on Hezekiah's actions, we are reminded of the timeless truth that true strength lies not in our own abilities, but in how we align ourselves with forces greater than ourselves. Whether you're leading a nation, a family, or simply navigating your own life, the lesson is clear. Preparation matters, but faith transforms. When faced with challenges, ask yourself, am I building walls of protection, or am I cultivating a spirit of trust? Because sometimes, the greatest victories come not from what we do, but from whom we believe in. The Assyrian army was not just a force of sheer numbers and brute strength. It was also a masterclass in psychological warfare, designed to break the spirit of its enemies long before a single sword was drawn. Imagine standing on the walls of Jerusalem, your heart pounding as you gaze upon the endless sea of soldiers below. Now, imagine hearing their voices, loud, deliberate, and mocking, cutting through the air like daggers aimed straight at your soul. This was no ordinary siege. This was an assault on the mind, a calculated campaign to dismantle hope and breed despair. King Sennacherib's strategy was as cunning as it was cruel. He understood that conquering a city wasn't just about overpowering its defenses. It was about shattering the will of its people. And so, he unleashed his most insidious weapon: words. The Assyrians didn't speak in their native tongue when addressing Jerusalem. They spoke in Hebrew, the language of the Jews. Every word was carefully chosen to resonate deeply with those inside the walls, to make them feel exposed, vulnerable, and alone. "Do you really think your king can save you?" they taunted. "Is your God any match for the might of Assyria?" These questions weren't merely rhetorical. They were poison, seeping into the cracks of doubt and fear that already lingered in the hearts of some. Their speeches were laced with arrogance and contempt, painting Hezekiah as a fool who had led his people to ruin. They ridiculed his decision to rely on faith rather than surrender, portraying trust in God as naive and futile. Has any god ever been able to deliver their land from the hand of the king of Assyria? They sneered, listing off nations and deities that had fallen before them. Each example was a hammer blow, driving home the idea that resistance was pointless and divine intervention impossible. To the people of Jerusalem, these words must have felt like a storm battering against their fragile resolve. How could anyone withstand such relentless mockery? But the psychological tactics went even deeper. The Assyrians played on the natural human tendency to question authority in times of crisis. They sowed seeds of division, whispering doubts about Hezekiah's leadership and the wisdom of his decisions. "Why should you suffer because of him?" they asked, appealing directly to the common citizens. "Open the gates, and we will spare your lives." It was a tempting offer, especially for those who were hungry, exhausted, or terrified. Surrender seemed like an escape, a way to avoid the horrors of battle and ensure survival. Yet beneath the surface, it was clear that surrender would mean something far worse: the loss of identity, freedom, and dignity. What made this psychological warfare so devastatingly effective was its universality. Fear is a language everyone speaks, regardless of culture or time period. The Assyrians tapped into primal emotions, uncertainty, helplessness, and the instinct for self-preservation, and amplified them until they drowned out all other thoughts. Even today, centuries later, we can recognize the power of such tactics. Propaganda, misinformation, and intimidation are tools still used in conflicts around the world, proving that the strategies employed by the Assyrians remain eerily relevant. Yet, there's another layer to consider here. While the Assyrians sought to exploit fear, they inadvertently revealed their own insecurities. Why go to such lengths to demoralize an opponent unless you doubted your ability to crush them outright? Their reliance on psychological manipulation suggests that perhaps they recognized Jerusalem's potential for resistance, that behind those fortified walls lay a people whose unity and faith could pose a real threat. In trying to weaken their enemy, the Assyrians may have unintentionally strengthened them, forcing the people of Jerusalem to confront their fears head-on and find courage in the face of adversity. This chapter of history serves as a powerful reminder of the impact words can have. They can wound or heal, divide or unite, destroy or inspire. For the people of Jerusalem, the choice was stark: succumb to the weight of the Assyrians' taunts, or rise above them. As we reflect on this moment, let us ask ourselves how we respond to the storms of doubt and fear in our own lives. Do we allow negativity to define us, or do we use it as fuel to strengthen our resolve? Because sometimes, the greatest battles are fought not on the field, but within the mind, and winning them requires more than strength. It requires faith, resilience, and an unshakable belief in something greater than ourselves. In the darkest hour, when fear seemed to claw at the edges of every heart in Jerusalem, King Hezekiah did something extraordinary. He didn't rally his troops with fiery speeches or devise new military strategies. Instead, he turned inward, to the one place where he believed true strength could be found: the temple of God. This moment is not just a pivotal scene in the story of Jerusalem's survival. It is a profound lesson in humility, faith, and the power of surrender when faced with overwhelming odds. Picture this: Hezekiah, a king burdened by the weight of leadership, enters the sacred space of the temple. The air is thick with incense, and the flickering light of oil lamps casts shadows on the stone walls. But there is no grandeur in his posture, only humility. He kneels before the altar, laying down not just his fears, but also his pride. In that act of vulnerability, Hezekiah models something rare and transformative: the courage to admit that he cannot face the storm alone. It's easy to imagine how tempting it must have been for him to rely solely on his own wisdom or the strength of his army. After all, kings are expected to project confidence, to appear invincible. Yet here was Hezekiah, stripped of pretense, acknowledging that the battle ahead was beyond human control. His prayer was raw and heartfelt, a cry to the heavens that echoed the desperation of his people. "O Lord God of Israel," he began, "you are enthroned above the cherubim, and you alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth." These words were more than a declaration of faith. They were an affirmation of perspective. In the face of an empire that claimed dominion over everything it touched, Hezekiah reminded himself and his people of a higher truth. The Assyrians might rule nations, but they did not rule the universe. Their power, though vast, was finite. God's power, however, was infinite. Hezekiah went on to recount the arrogance of Sennacherib, who had blasphemed against the Almighty, mocking his ability to protect Jerusalem. "They have insulted you, O Lord," Hezekiah prayed, and said, "By the strength of my hand I have done this, and by my wisdom, for I am clever." Here, Hezekiah wasn't merely listing grievances. He was exposing the hubris of the Assyrian king. Sennacherib saw himself as untouchable, a force of nature unto himself. But Hezekiah knew better. He understood that pride unchecked becomes its own undoing, a theme as timeless as history itself. What makes Hezekiah's prayer so compelling is not just its content, but its tone. There is no demand for vengeance, no plea for destruction upon the enemy. Instead, there is a quiet trust that justice will prevail. "Now, O Lord our God, deliver us from his hand," Hezekiah implored, "so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone, O Lord, are God." This was not about proving superiority or securing revenge. It was about bearing witness to divine sovereignty. Hezekiah's ultimate hope was not just for Jerusalem's salvation, but for the world to recognize the source of true power. This moment of prayer offers us a glimpse into the soul of a leader who understood that faith is not passive. It is active, deliberate, and courageous. Hezekiah could have chosen anger, despair, or resignation. Instead, he chose trust. And in doing so, he set an example that transcends time and circumstance. When we find ourselves surrounded by challenges that seem insurmountable, what do we turn to? Do we lean into fear, or do we seek solace in something greater than ourselves? Hezekiah's prayer also teaches us the importance of collective faith. While he stood alone in the temple, his words carried the hopes and fears of an entire city. His act of devotion became a rallying cry for the people of Jerusalem, reminding them that their fate was tied not to the whims of an earthly king, but to the promises of a heavenly one. It's a powerful reminder that leadership is not about standing apart from others, but standing with them, in prayer, in purpose, and in perseverance. As we reflect on Hezekiah's prayer, let us consider the role of faith in our own lives. How often do we allow fear to dictate our actions instead of leaning into belief? What battles are we fighting today that require not just physical preparation, but spiritual fortitude? Hezekiah's story invites us to pause, to kneel if necessary, and to remember that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is surrender, not to the forces arrayed against us, but to the one who holds the universe in his hands. As the echoes of Hezekiah's prayer faded within the sacred walls of the temple, a profound stillness settled over Jerusalem. It was as if time itself paused, holding its breath, waiting for an answer to the king's desperate plea. And then, in that silence, a voice emerged, not from the heavens with thunderous fanfare, but through the steady, unwavering words of the prophet Isaiah. This moment is not just a divine response. It is a masterclass in reassurance, a declaration of hope that would ripple through history and remind humanity of the power of faith when aligned with divine purpose. Isaiah's message began with clarity and authority, cutting through the fog of fear that had enveloped the city. "This is what the Lord says," he proclaimed, his voice resonating with conviction. "Do not be afraid of the words you have heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me." These opening lines were more than mere comfort. They were a direct confrontation of the psychological warfare waged by the Assyrians. The enemy had sought to instill terror, to make the people doubt their God and their king. But Isaiah's words dismantled those lies piece by piece, replacing fear with faith and despair with determination. The prophecy went further, addressing the heart of the matter, the pride of Sennacherib. Isaiah recounted how the Assyrian king had exalted himself, boasting of his conquests and daring to compare the God of Israel to the powerless idols of other nations. "Because you rage against me," the Lord declared through Isaiah, "and because your arrogance has reached my ears, I will put my hook in your nose and my bit in your mouth, and I will make you return by the way you came." These words were not just a promise of deliverance, they were a rebuke of hubris. Sennacherib had placed himself on a pedestal, believing himself untouchable, yet the prophecy revealed the fragility of his position. His empire, though mighty, was built on sand, a foundation destined to crumble under the weight of its own arrogance. What makes Isaiah's message so compelling is its dual nature. It is both a warning and a promise. To the Assyrians, it served as a sobering reminder that no earthly power can stand against the Creator of the universe. Their victories, impressive as they may have been, were ultimately hollow because they failed to acknowledge the source of all authority. To the people of Jerusalem, however, the prophecy was a lifeline, a tangible assurance that their trust in God was not misplaced. "He will not enter this city or shoot an arrow here," Isaiah continued. "By the way that he came, he will return. He will not enter this city, declares the Lord." These words carried immense weight, not only for their immediate implications, but also for their broader significance. They reinforced a timeless truth. Pride blinds us to our limitations, while humility opens the door to grace. Sennacherib's downfall was not merely a military defeat, it was a moral one. His refusal to recognize the sovereignty of God sealed his fate, serving as a cautionary tale for anyone who dares to elevate themselves above the divine. For the people of Jerusalem, Isaiah's message transformed fear into resolve. It reminded them that their battle was not theirs alone, it was God's. This realization shifted their perspective entirely. No longer were they fighting out of desperation. They were standing firm in the knowledge that victory had already been secured. The prophecy became a rallying cry, uniting the city in a shared belief that deliverance was imminent. Every word spoken by Isaiah was a thread weaving together the fabric of hope, binding the hearts of the people to a higher purpose. This moment also highlights the critical role of prophets in times of crisis. Isaiah was not just a messenger, he was a bridge between heaven and earth, bringing clarity to confusion and light to darkness. His words carried the weight of divine authority, yet they were delivered with compassion and understanding. In many ways, Isaiah embodied the qualities we should seek in leadership. Someone who speaks truth without compromise, yet does so with empathy and care. As we reflect on Isaiah's message, let us consider the lessons it holds for our own lives. How often do we allow pride to cloud our judgment or fear to dictate our actions? What battles are we facing today that require not just human effort, but divine intervention? Isaiah's prophecy invites us to trust in something greater than ourselves, to believe that even when the odds seem insurmountable, there is always a higher power at work. In the end, Isaiah's words were not just a promise to Jerusalem. They were a promise to all who dare to place their faith in the unseen. They remind us that true strength lies not in our ability to conquer, but in our willingness to surrender, to trust that the same God who delivered Jerusalem can deliver us from whatever stands in our way. And perhaps most importantly, they challenge us to live with humility, knowing that every victory we achieve is not ours alone, but a testament to the greatness of the one who guides us. The arrogance of King Sennacherib reached its zenith in a moment that would seal his fate, a moment so audacious, so blasphemous, that it became the tipping point for divine intervention. Imagine the scene. A king who had already conquered countless nations now stood at the gates of Jerusalem, not just as a military leader, but as a self-proclaimed deity. His words were not those of negotiation or even intimidation. They were outright mockery, a direct challenge to the sovereignty of the God of Israel. "Am I any different from the gods of other lands?" he taunted. "Have they ever been able to stop me? Why should your God be any different?" Sennacherib's blasphemy was more than mere arrogance. It was a calculated insult designed to strip away the last vestiges of hope from the people of Jerusalem. By comparing the God of Israel to the lifeless idols of defeated nations, he sought to reduce him to nothing more than another powerless figurehead. To Sennacherib, gods were constructs of human imagination, tools used by rulers to control their subjects. He saw no distinction between the golden statues worshipped in Babylon and the God revered in Jerusalem. In his mind, all deities were equally impotent against the might of Assyria. But what Sennacherib failed to grasp was the profound difference between the idols he dismissed and the living God he dared to defy. Idols, after all, are creations of human hands, silent, immobile, and devoid of power. They require offerings, rituals, and constant maintenance, yet they offer nothing in return. The God of Israel, however, is no idol. He is the creator of heaven and earth, the one who spoke the universe into existence and sustains it with his word. Unlike the mute gods of wood and stone, he hears prayers, answers cries for help, and acts with purpose. Sennacherib's fatal mistake was failing to recognize this distinction. His comparison of the Almighty to powerless idols was not just ignorance. It was an act of rebellion against the very fabric of reality. This moment of blasphemy serves as a stark reminder of humanity's tendency to elevate itself above the divine. Throughout history, we see examples of leaders and empires who believed themselves invincible, only to fall because they refused to acknowledge their limits. Sennacherib's words echo the sentiments of Pharaoh in Egypt, Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, and countless others who dared to place themselves on the throne of God. Their stories share a common thread. Pride blinds us to our vulnerabilities, leading us to believe that we are untouchable until reality intervenes. Yet, there is something uniquely chilling about Sennacherib's defiance. Unlike other rulers who may have unknowingly crossed divine boundaries, Sennacherib did so knowingly and deliberately. He wasn't simply dismissive of the God of Israel. He was contemptuous, mocking him openly and challenging his authority. This was not a man caught in the grip of hubris. This was a man reveling in it. And in doing so, he set the stage for his own undoing. What makes this moment so compelling is the tension it creates, not just between Sennacherib and God, but within ourselves as observers. How often do we, like Sennacherib, underestimate forces beyond our understanding? Whether it's dismissing spiritual truths, ignoring moral principles, or rejecting wisdom greater than our own, we too can fall prey to the illusion of self-sufficiency. Sennacherib's story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. Where do we draw the line between confidence and arrogance? When does our pursuit of power become a rejection of humility? And most importantly, how do we respond when confronted with truths that challenge our worldview? For the people of Jerusalem, Sennacherib's blasphemy must have felt like a slap in the face, a final attempt to crush their spirits before the siege concluded. Yet, paradoxically, it became the catalyst for their deliverance. By daring to mock the Almighty, Sennacherib unwittingly invited judgment upon himself. His words, intended to demoralize, instead served as a declaration of war, not against Jerusalem, but against the Creator of the universe. And as history would soon reveal, no one wages war against God and emerges victorious. As we reflect on this chapter of the story, let us consider the lessons it holds for our own lives. How often do we allow pride to blind us to the bigger picture? What idols do we cling to, whether literal or metaphorical, that distract us from recognizing the truth? Sennacherib's downfall reminds us that true strength lies not in asserting our dominance, but in acknowledging our dependence on something greater than ourselves. It challenges us to examine the foundations upon which we build our lives and ask whether they can withstand the test of time or the judgment of eternity. In the end, Sennacherib's blasphemy was not just an affront to God, it was a reflection of his own brokenness. Like all who exalt themselves, he ultimately fell. But his story leaves us with a choice. Will we follow in his footsteps, clinging to pride and defiance, or will we humble ourselves and seek alignment with the one who holds all things together? The answer shapes not only our destiny, but also the legacy we leave behind. The night that followed Sennacherib's blasphemy was unlike any other in Jerusalem. The air, thick with tension and the weight of impending doom, seemed to hold its breath, as if the entire city were suspended in a moment of divine anticipation. Then, without warning, the unimaginable happened. As dawn broke over the horizon, the people of Jerusalem awoke to an eerie silence, a silence so profound it sent shivers down their spines. The clamor of the Assyrian camp, which had echoed through the valley for weeks, was gone. Curiosity turned to awe, and awe turned to disbelief as scouts ventured beyond the city walls to investigate. What they discovered would be etched into the annals of history forever. The once mighty Assyrian army lay decimated. 185,000 soldiers, men who had marched across continents, toppling kingdoms and instilling terror, were dead. Their bodies littered the ground, their weapons scattered like discarded toys. There were no signs of battle, no evidence of human conflict. It was as though an invisible hand had swept through the camp, leaving destruction in its wake. The prophet Isaiah's words had come true. God himself had intervened, striking down the pride of Assyria and sparing Jerusalem. This miraculous event is more than just a historical footnote. It is a testament to the sovereignty of God and the futility of human arrogance. Sennacherib, whose name had once struck fear into the hearts of nations, fled back to Nineveh, his empire humbled and his reputation shattered. Yet even this was not the end of his story. Years later, while worshiping in the temple of his god Nisroch, he was assassinated by his own sons, a final act of divine justice that underscored the fleeting nature of earthly power. The man who had dared to mock the Almighty met a fate that mirrored his hubris, cut down, not on the battlefield, but in a place meant for reverence. For the people of Jerusalem, The deliverance was nothing short of transformative. It wasn't just that they had survived, it was how they had survived. Against all odds, they had witnessed firsthand the power of faith and the faithfulness of God. This victory became a cornerstone of their identity, a reminder that their strength did not lie in their armies or fortifications, but in their trust in the Creator of the universe. Generations to come would recount this story, passing it down as a beacon of hope during times of trial. It was proof that no matter how dire the circumstances, God could turn the tide in an instant. But the implications of this event extend far beyond the borders of ancient Jerusalem. It speaks to a universal truth about the nature of power and humility. Empires rise and fall, leaders ascend and collapse, yet the one constant throughout history is the presence of something greater than ourselves. Sennacherib's downfall serves as a sobering reminder that pride, when left unchecked, becomes its own undoing. His story challenges us to examine our own lives. Where do we place our confidence? In our achievements, our intellect, our resources, or in something eternal? Moreover, this moment of divine intervention invites us to reflect on the role of faith in the face of adversity. How often do we allow fear to dictate our actions instead of leaning into belief? What battles are we fighting today that require not just human effort, but divine guidance? The deliverance of Jerusalem reminds us that faith is not passive. It is active, courageous, and unyielding. It calls us to stand firm, even when the world tells us to surrender. As we close this chapter of history, let us carry its lessons forward. Let us remember that true strength lies not in asserting control, but in surrendering to a higher purpose. Let us choose humility over hubris, trust over fear, and faith over doubt. Because in the end, the same God who delivered Jerusalem still reigns supreme, ready to intervene in ways we cannot predict or comprehend. And perhaps, like Hezekiah and his people, we too can find courage in knowing that we are never alone in the fight. So, I leave you with this question. What will you do with the challenges before you? Will you rely on your own strength, or will you seek the strength of the one who holds eternity in his hands? The choice is yours, but the outcome may surprise you. As we reflect on the story of Jerusalem and the Assyrian siege, it's hard not to feel a sense of awe at how history can challenge our assumptions about power, faith, and resilience. What struck me most while exploring this event was the profound reminder that strength isn't always measured in numbers or weapons. It's found in conviction, unity, and an unshakable belief in something greater than ourselves. Hezekiah didn't just prepare his city for battle, he prepared his people's hearts. And in doing so, he showed us that true leadership isn't about instilling fear, it's about inspiring hope. The key lesson here is one we can all carry into our own lives. No matter how insurmountable the odds may seem, there is always room for courage, trust, and perseverance. Whether you're facing personal challenges, professional setbacks, or even moments of doubt, remember that sometimes the greatest victories come when we choose to stand firm in what we believe, even when the world tells us it's impossible. So, what will you take away from this story? Will you question the limits you've placed on yourself? Will you reconsider where your strength truly lies? I encourage you to dig deeper, explore stories like this one, engage in conversations with others about what gives them strength, and reflect on what drives you. Share your thoughts with someone close to you, or better yet, take a step toward confronting a challenge you've been avoiding. Let this ancient tale remind you that history isn't just something we read, It's something we live every day. And who knows? Maybe your story of triumph is waiting to unfold.